Well, hello and welcome to this next video in our series looking at Scotland's long Reformation. Now we're going to be looking at the events after the signing of the National Covenant and before the restoration of the monarchy and the reign of Charles II. So the period from 1638 till 1660. Now this is a very complicated time and there's a lot going on, so I'll probably split it between two videos just so we can cover the main events. Now when we finished the last time, we had the signing of the National Covenant and the first free General Assembly for many years being held in Glasgow in November 1638, despite the King's attempts to try and stop it. Now after that, King Charles I sought to regain control of the Church in Scotland by force, and the following year, 1639, saw the outbreak of what became known as the First Bishops' War. The Covenanters had raised an army and the King was doing the same, but in England there were very few who were actually keen on a war with Scotland, and the King really struggled to get an army together. He did however get one and marched towards the border with Scotland. In Scotland the Covenanters got an army together themselves and marched south under General Leslie to deal with this threat, and right on the border between Scotland and England the two sides met. However, when the King's men saw the determination of the Covenanters with these new blue banners flying which said for Christ's crown and covenant on them, they decided it was better to negotiate instead of fight. So the Covenanters really forced the King to agree to a treaty known as the Treaty of Berrick. As part of that treaty, the King agreed to allow a free General Assembly. All future church matters as well would be decided by these church assemblies, and all civil matters would be decided by the Parliament. But the reality is that Charles I was just stalling for time, and he was already planning to go to war with the Covenanters again. Now, wars cost money. So in April 1640, despite ruling for 11 years without a Parliament, Charles called what would be known as the Short Parliament to try and get money to fight the Covenanters. However, the English Parliament were more interested in discussing their own issues with the King than actually just giving him money. So after just 3 weeks, this Short Parliament was dissolved, hence the name, the Short Parliament. It sat for only 3 weeks. After that, Charles decided to go to war with the Covenanters without money from Parliament. During all this, the Covenanters themselves were again preparing for War II, and we have the beginning of the Second Bishops' War. Second Bishops' War started in August 1640. On the 20th of August 1640, instead of waiting for Charles and his army to invade Scotland, General Leslie and a Covenanter army of over 20,000 men invaded England, and after a short battle at a place called Newburn, they captured the northern city of Newcastle. After that, the morale of the King's troops completely collapsed, and once again Charles was forced to make another treaty with the Covenanters. This time it was just a temporary one known as the Treaty of Berrick, and as part of that treaty the Scots would stay, the Scottish Covenanter army would stay in the north of England until they got a more permanent agreement, till that could be sorted out, and whilst they were there they would have to be paid £850 per day for their quarters. Charles therefore was forced to call what would be known as the Long Parliament in November to get money to do this. A full peace treaty known as the Treaty of London was eventually agreed, however, in August 1641, and Charles agreed to confirm the acts of the recent General Assemblies in Scotland, including the abolition of bishops in Scotland. However, in England the relationship between Charles I and Parliament was at breaking point over several issues, and as talks broke down, both sides began raising armies. The English Civil War began in August 1642, and by 1643, after some early successes by the King and his royalist army, Parliament began to look to Scotland and to the Covenanters for military help. As I say, this English Parliament wanted military help from the Covenanters. But the Covenanters instead, they wanted a religious union. They wanted to see the Church in England become the same as the Church of Scotland in its belief, in its worship, and in its church government, Presbyterian. Now, one Scottish minister, Robert Baillie, he said the English were for a civil league, we for a religious covenant. And the end result was a mixture of both, and it was known as the Solemn League and Covenant. And again, this was mainly written by Alexander Henderson. Alexander Henderson, one of the main persons who worked on the National Covenant of 1638 and had a large section of that. He wrote a large section of that. Now, this Solemn League and Covenant aimed to preserve and protect the Reformation of the Church here in Scotland, but also looked to reform the churches of England and Ireland, so that the three churches would be the same in the way that they were governed and what they believed in and in their worship. And also to get rid of Roman Catholicism and Episcopalianism, the form of church government where the monarch is the head. It was signed by the Parliaments of England and Scotland and many people throughout England, Scotland and Ireland as well. As a result of this, the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland sent a small group of ministers and elders to the Westminster Assembly. Now, this Westminster Assembly had been set up by the Long Parliament in July 1643, and their job was to look at reforming the church in England. It consisted mainly of English ministers, but it also had representatives from the House of Lords and from the House of Commons as well. Some of the Scottish ministers and elders who attended from Scotland were again Alexander Henderson, others like Samuel Rutherford and Archibald Campbell, the Marquis of Argyll, and others. And although the Scottish commissioners were only a very small group, they had a massive impact on the work of the Westminster Assembly. In 1645, the Directory for the public worship of God was completed and agreed by Parliament, as had the form of Presbyterian church government. These were then followed by the Westminster Confession of Faith in 1646 and the larger and shorter catechisms in 1647. Now, these are incredibly important documents, and they're known as the Westminster Standards. And throughout the world, in Presbyterian churches all over the world today, they are still used as well. So very, very important documents, very important, these Westminster Standards. Meanwhile, militarily, the Covenanter army was in England, helping the English Parliament in the war against Charles and his royalist forces, as agreed by the Solemn League and Covenant. In July 1644, they helped to inflict a crushing defeat on the royalists and the royalist army at the Battle of Marston Moor, which is near York. However, afterwards, this Covenanter army had to very quickly return to Scotland to deal with a threat from a former Covenanter, now turned royalist, James Graham, the Marquis of Montrose. James Graham, the Marquis of Montrose, had been one of the first to sign the National Covenant in 1638 and had been one of the leaders of the Covenanter army. However, by 1644, his allegiances have changed, and with troops brought over from Ireland and Scottish Highlanders, he begins a campaign for Charles I against the Covenanters in Scotland. And after great success and many victories against the Covenanters, he is eventually defeated at the Battle of Philip Haugh, which is just outside Selkirk, in September 1645. So with the Montrose threat stopped, the Covenanter army can again return to England and aid Parliament in their war against the King. And by July 1646, King Charles and his army had been defeated by Oliver Cromwell and the Royalist and the Parliamentarian army, and Charles had been forced to surrender. He hands himself over to the Covenanters because he thinks he's going to get treated fair, a fairer treatment from the Scottish Covenanters. And after a little while, however, the Covenanters hand him over to the English parliamentarian army. Now we're going to leave it here for now, but in the next video we're going to look at what happens next. We're going to look at Oliver Cromwell, we're going to have a look at what happened to Charles I, and we're going to see how all this affected Scotland and affected the Covenanters, and we'll look at the period up to the return of Charles II at the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. So we'll bring that to you shortly. So thanks again, take care.